All right. Very excited about this sermon. The name of it is going to be called Con-sin-quench. Con-sin-quench. You may be thinking, what in the world does that mean? Let me explain it. First, let me explain what this sermon is about, and then I'm going to explain the title, and it's all going to make sense. Y'all know me. I'm big on doing a play on words, mixing and matching and putting stuff together with my sermon title. So check this out. Maybe some of you're in a position right now where you've been waiting for something, for God to do something for you, maybe to open up a door for you to have some type of an opportunity, or maybe He has some blessings for you. Maybe there's something that you've really wanted that He's about to give you. Da 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 da, right? But maybe you're in a place right now where you've been waiting for so long, and maybe you didn't even think you'd have to wait this long for what it is that you're waiting for, even though you know it's coming. Maybe you're at a point now where you're getting so itchy and so impatient that maybe you've considered stepping out of the will of God to try to get what it is that you want your way, and just trying to be content with doing it your way instead of waiting on God's timing. It's an issue of God's timing. You're in position. You've been waiting. You've been obedient. You've been, waiting it out. But maybe you're so thirsty to get whatever it is that you're trying to get to, or to complete whatever goal you're trying to complete, that you're not wanting to wait. Or maybe you're thinking twice. You're considering about stepping outside of the will and trying to pursue what it is that you want to pursue and get it your way, how you want it done, when you want it done, this, that, and the other. If that's the case, this sermon could be for you. If that's how you're feeling right now, this sermon could be for you, because what I'm going to talk to you about is this. I'm going to give you consequences. I'm going to show you in scripture in just a second the consequences of your actions. In other words, the end results, what could be the end results of your actions. What can be the consequences of you being disobedient and stepping out of God's will and stepping out of waiting on His timing. And this should be like an encouraging word to you to, stay on track so that you don't have to deal with these consequences I'm about to show you. So now, the name of the sermon, Con-sin-quench, is almost like a broken down way of saying consequence. Get it? Con-sin-quench, consequence. And what I mean is this. When you disobey God, you're sinning. So there's the sin, right? S-I-N. And so when you try to do something your way as opposed to God's way, you want to try to fabricate it and do it your way and make what God is trying to do, but you try to manipulate it and try to force your hand in it. You're being a con man or a con artist, being deceitful and trying to do what God is doing, but try to do it your way and try to get all the credit for it, but try to make it appear as though it's a God thing when really it's not, because your hand was in it. So there's the con, C-O-N. You get it? So con, sin, and then quench, because you're trying to quench that thirst that God is already getting ready to quench for you. You're trying to quench it on your own. So con, sin, quench. Or listen, the consequences, oh goodness, of your actions. So let's just jump right on into this. I just had a lot of fun just explaining that. But anyway, gonna be starting out here in Genesis chapter 16. And I'm gonna start with a story that is pretty well known. It's the story of Abraham and Sarah. And of course, right now we're in a point of the Bible where Abraham is still called Abram. and Sarah as Sarai. God has not changed their names to Abraham and Sarah just yet. But they're a couple and they've been wanting to have a child, but Sarah, or Sarai at this point, she's barren. She can't reproduce. And Abraham, he's getting on up in age. So it's seeming like it's going to be an impossible task for them to have a child. But God promises Abraham, you're going to have a son. You'll name him Isaac. Your seed line's going to be blessed. Da, 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 da. Don't even worry about it. When the time is right, in my timing, I'm going to make this play out. It's going to be awesome. Just be patient, have faith, and wait on me, because what I'm going to do is going to blow your mind. That's basically what God's trying to say. So they wait for a while, but they get a little impatient. So Genesis chapter 16, let's look at the first 6 verses. It says this: Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah. And Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Let me just stop right here to explain what's going on. They've been waiting, nothing's happened, and so Sarah's like, okay, I've got this maid named Hagar. Basically what she says to her husband is just use her as a concubine. Just have sex with her, get her pregnant, and the child that she ends up having can basically be like, our child, but she's having the child for me, is basically what she's saying. So what they're doing is they're stepping out of God's will, because God's already made this promise that he's going to make a way out of no way. That's what he's good at. That's what he does. That's his thing, right? But they decide to jump the gun and to try to make it happen their way. So they add somebody else to the mix who's not supposed to be a part of this mix. And so sure enough, Abram goes along with it. He gets Hagar pregnant. And so Hagar ends up despising Sarah, kind of having this attitude with her. There's a little bit of strife, some friction between the two. And so so now Sarah's a little bit upset about this. Let's look at this, verses 5 and 6. And Sarah said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. And Abram said unto Sarah, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So what has happened here is this, and now we're seeing some consequences, or con-sin-quenches, of their actions. One of the things is that things are not going over so smooth between Sarah, Abram's wife, and Hagar, the maid. She's having the baby, so now she has something against Sarah. There's friction. Now, let me say this. If you all remember last week, a couple of sermons ago, I had this sermon and I was talking about streets of rage. That was the name of it. I was talking about anger and different things of that nature. And I was talking about how we end up bringing anger from the streets into the household. And, so sometimes people will have anger in their household, and there's domestic violence and yelling and screaming and cussing each other out and, punching, holes in the walls and throwing chairs and just the whole 9 yards. It's a mess. And everybody's at ends with each other, husband against wife and child against parent. Everybody's into it. anger, wrath. And so I talked about how it's almost like having a civil war in your own home. You're supposed to be one family, one unit, one household, but you're divided. And I quoted that verse from the Bible where Jesus was talking about how a house divided can't stand. You know, you can't have this division in the home or else it's just going to fall apart. And so what's basically happened here is now there's some division going on. So they've stepped out of God's will to try to do this their way. And so now there's division. And it has to be dealt with so that this family that's supposed to be together, Abram and Sarah, doesn't fall apart. So that's one consequence, is division in the home, division in the household can occur when stepping out of God's will. So then we see that Sarah and Hagar, it's like they get into it. And Hagar flees from Sarah's face. So the next thing that we see is not only division in the household, but we see people getting hurt feelings, people getting into it. In other words, there comes a point where if you're not careful, you will involve people that shouldn't be involved in your situation, and they end up getting hurt. And so then this also brings me to a next con-sin-quench or consequence, and it's this. Sometimes not only do you just have friction within the household, and not only do you start bringing other people who should be on the outside into the problem and causing hurt feelings, but then we take it a step further, and what happens is we start adding extra weight and extra responsibility onto ourselves that shouldn't be there. Abram already has Sarah to tend to, but now he's got this extra weight and responsibility because of the child that's now coming into the picture with Hagar. So now it's going to be hard for him to let go of Hagar because he's going to have to do it sooner or later. But it's going to be hard for him to detach and stay attached to his wife fully, cleaving unto her fully, because now there's a child in the mix. So that adds extra weight and responsibility, and it makes it harder for him later on to tend to the responsibility of the child that he is going to have with Sarah, the one that God has promised. But he's not seeing it that way right now because he's just looking at it as, well, you know, this is the one, this is the child that's, you know, going to be such this huge blessing to me, but it's not. So we see some consequences starting to play out. So now let's skip over to, let's see here, chapter 21. Still in Genesis chapter 21, starting at the beginning, it says this. And the Lord visited Sarah. Now he's changed the name, Sarah and Abraham. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. So God did as he promised. It was all in his timing. Verse 3, and Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. So this is the promised son, Isaac, that God said was going to be conceived. Verse 4, and Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So not only did God do the miraculous of opening up Sarah's womb, but Abraham was 100 years old. So it's at a time where it seems like it's just totally impossible for this promise of God to happen, that it happens. They just had to be patient and wait. Verse 6, and Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. So now we see the joy. Verse 7, and she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. So it seems like everything's going good. He's got, Hagar and her son Ishmael, and then he's got his actual original wife Sarah, who's now giving birth to little Isaac. So it seems like everything's gonna be smooth, right? Like no big deal. So what? That little incident happened with Hagar. We're all just gonna be one big happy family. No big deal. No, that's not how it happens. Verse 9. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. So what has happened is Sarah, everything seems to be going good, and it seems like maybe things between Sarah and Hagar, the maid, have been patched up. Like, no big deal. We're just going to be content. We're just going to deal with each other. Da, 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 da. But Sarah sees Hagar's son mocking her son. So what has happened is this. Some chapters ago, we saw how Hagar despised Sarah and had a mocking attitude towards her. But now that she has had this son, Ishmael, and Sarah has had her son, Isaac, we see Hagar's son mocking and despising Sarah's son. So Sarah already had to put up with some nonsense from Hagar, but now she's seeing her son having to put up with some nonsense from Hagar's son. So she's just basically going to be a mother about this. She's like, okay, I tolerated some stuff from this woman, but not my child. I'm not going to watch my child go through the mocking that I put up with. I ain't having this. She's being defensive of her son, and rightfully so. She's like, I put up with it, but my kid is not going to put up with it. So she goes to Abraham, and she's just like, look, I've had enough. You're going to have to get rid of this woman. You're going to have to get rid of this woman and this kid. I know it's your kid and all, but it's not our kid. It's just your kid that you got with her, but it's not our kid. It's not the promised child. You're going to have to get rid of him. Verse 11, and the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. Abraham didn't want to cast Hagar and Ishmael out of the house because it was his son. So what's basically happened is, it's like he's bound to this bondwoman. Oh goodness. The woman is a maid who's bound to them because she's their servant. But now the tables have kind of turned because now Abraham feels bound to her. He's bound to the bondwoman. He's bound to the one who was originally bound to them because of the son they have together. So now, because he's emotionally tied, emotionally invested, now he doesn't want to let him go. Even though he sees that it's disturbing the promise and the future that God has for him. Because now we see more division in the household. Now we see he's got more extra added responsibilities onto his weight, because he's not only having to deal with his wife and son, but the maid and the son he has with her. And now, because of this son in the mix, it's just making it so much more worse for him to say goodbye. It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday. Y'all know the song. But anyway, but he's having a hard time saying goodbye to yesterday, because that's what it represents. That's what Hagar and Ishmael represent, was his yesterday, the mistakes of his past, stepping out of the will of God. But now that he's trying to do right and follow the will, he won't be able to step into all the promises and blessings that are to come that he knows God has for him. And now he really knows it because he's seen this miracle. So he's like, okay, God's not playing. God really has some stuff for me and my wife. But in order for him to walk into all of it, he's going to have to say goodbye to yesterday. He's going to have to let go of the maid and the child that he has had with her. So he's got to say goodbye to yesterday to go into his future. So now he's got to face his consequences, or con-sin-quenches, head on. Oh goodness. So he has to let them go. Now hold your spot. If you've got a bookmark and you're following along, hold your spot here in Genesis, because at the end of the sermon I'm going to come back to this spot. But for now, move forward with me to 2 Samuel. And I'm not going to spend very long here. The last sermon that I did, the sermon that I did last week, I touched on 1 and 2 Samuel. And when I was in 2 Samuel, I was talking about David and Bathsheba. I'm not going to read all that because, I read a lot of it last sermon, but I'm just going to sum it up real quick and pick up from where I left off with that to make a point in this sermon. So what happened before this chapter 12, what happens over in chapter 11 of 2 Samuel is that you've got David. King David, he sees this woman bathing named Bathsheba, and he wants this woman, and he finds out that this woman is actually married to a man named Uriah. Uriah is a man who is a soldier in David's army. So he decides, screw it, I'm going to go ahead and mess around with this woman anyway. His lust got the best of him, so he messes around with Bathsheba. She ends up getting pregnant by him, and so he comes up with all these plans to hide the sin, the mess that he's made. So he has Uriah come back from the battlefield back home, and he tries to, just have small talk with him, smooth things over, just chit chat with him. And he gives Uriah the opportunity to stay the night there in town. He's given him the opportunity to go home and rest, and then later, another day, go back out into the battlefield. And he's hoping that he'll go home, sleep with his wife, and then that way it can later be revealed to him that his wife is pregnant, and it can come across to Uriah that the baby is his and not David's. But Uriah decides, no, I'm not going to go home and sleep in my bed, sleep with my wife, because it's not fair to everybody else that's still out there in battle, still out there on the battlefield. They don't have this opportunity that I have. So, it's just not going to be fair to them. I'm not going to do it. Then David comes up with the plan to get him drunk. And he's thinking, okay, now he'll go lay down with his wife. But he still doesn't do it. Uriah still doesn't do it. So now David comes up with this plan to have Uriah killed. He sends a letter to some people out there in battle, and he says, hey, next time y'all are out in battle, make sure you put Uriah in a spot that is just full of chaos. Make sure he's in a very hot spot on that battlefield, and at the right time, back up from him, retreat, retire, remove yourselves from him, and allow him to get killed. And sure enough, they do that. Uriah ends up getting killed in battle, and so now, since he's out of the picture, David decides to take on Bathsheba to be his wife. So he marries her. So that way it can appear as though, when she has the baby, it can appear as though, they hadn't even messed around until after he had died. So he's coming up with all these different plans to try to, cover things up. But it's very displeasing to God. And so God sends a man named Nathan to come and basically call David out to commit of him what he's done, to show him his sin, to make him come face to face with what he's done. so that David will have a heart of repentance and acknowledge what he's done. So, verse 7, I'll read this little part again. Starting at verse 7, it says this in 2 Samuel chapter 12. It says, "And Nathan said to David, Thou art the man. Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul." So Nathan is, God is speaking through Nathan, telling David what he's done. And God is saying to David, I'm the one that anointed you. I made you king. I delivered you out of the hand of Saul. Look at what I've done for you. Verse 8 says, "And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and all of Judah." And listen to this. "And if that had been too little, I would moreover have given unto thee such and such things." So God is showing him, hey, I've given you your master's house. I've given you all these wives. I've given you all this land. I've given you so much. But he ends that verse by saying, I could and would and should and wouldn't mind giving you so much more if that wasn't enough for you. Point being this. I was talking about Abraham in Genesis, and we know Abraham was just, extremely blessed by God when it was all said and done. I mean, God blessed him tremendously, all because of his faith and because of Abraham's heart for God. Same with David. David had such a heart for God, and that's why God chose David to be next in line to be king after Saul. It was all because of his heart and his faith in the Lord. And so he wanted to bless David tremendously as well. He's another person who's known in the Bible for being so blessed. So you have to know, and you've got to definitely see by the end of verse 8, that even though God has blessed David, just like how he blessed Abraham, he wanted to continue to bless him the more so, just like how he wanted to continue to bless Abraham. Why do I bring that up? Well, watch this. Verse 9, it says, "Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun." And David said unto Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." And Nathan said unto David, "The Lord also hath put away thy sin, thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die." So what I'm getting at here is this, and this is what I want you to see, because we talked about Abraham and the division in the home, having this extra weight to carry, this, that, and the other, hurting people getting their feelings hurt. But the thing about his situation, Abraham's situation, was that it wasn't until he was willing to let go of what he had done, willing to let go of yesterday to move forward. In other words, the consequences of his actions was that it was holding him back from having more. What we see here in this story, we see David who's blessed, and God wants to bless him more. But we see what happens for David when he sins and he steps out of the will of God for his life. What happens with David is that instead of it being so much something that holds him back from being blessed more, what we see with David is that it takes from him. God took blessings from David. He said, I'm going to take away the wives and take away this and take away all these things. And the sword is going to be in your household. In other words, division in your home. So we see the division just like with Abraham. And we see that David could be blessed more, but in Abraham's case, it held him back from more blessings. In David's case, we see uh, the result for him was that blessings were taken away. So what I'm saying to you is some of the consequences for your actions of stepping out of God's will is that not only can it pause you from moving forward into more blessings, but it can also have that reverse effect where it takes away from some of the blessings you've gained. Not only just blessings that were originally for you, but even blessings that were given to you that God took away from somebody else because they didn't want to get some act right. So again, the division, taking on the weight, hurting people. So Hagar ended up being hurt in Abraham's story, the maid. In this story with David, it's the child that Bathsheba is going to bear that gets hurt because it's going to die. I mean, it's not about somebody's feelings getting hurt, a child's feelings getting hurt. Like, it's like a permanent hurt. It's like, it's going to die. So, again, we see some similarities, some parallels there. But I just wanted to show you that not only will it hold you back from more blessings, but it'll cause things to be removed. And you may say, well, why come here to this story of David to show blessings being removed? Because, of course, Hagar had to be removed and Ishmael had to be removed out of Abraham's wife. Why not just use that as an example? But again, the thing you got to understand is David had blessings given to him removed, but Hagar and Ishmael were not supposed to be blessings for Abraham. Those were the byproducts of his decisions that he made. They were not the blessings. Isaac was the blessing that God was supposed to be given to him. So Hagar and Ishmael, as mean as it may sound, they don't count as being blessings taken away, really. As rough as that sounds. It's just the reality of it. So now that I've made those points, now that I've shown you some of the con-sin-quenches of your actions for stepping out of the will and not being patient and this and that, move with me to Matthew chapter 22, starting at verse 37. It says this, Jesus says, here in verse 37, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Why do I come here? I come here to say this. Because you may be asking, okay, all right, How do I remain patient? How do I continue to stand firm and stay in God's will? It's this. You love God, right? Obviously you do, otherwise you wouldn't be in God's will waiting for him, waiting on his timing. You have to remind yourself that because you love God, you don't want to sin against him. You don't want to step out of his will. You don't want to sin against him. And you don't want to do things that in the long run can not only hurt you, but other people. Because that's what we saw in those two stories with Abraham and David. You don't want to upset God, but you also don't want to upset or hurt other people because of your actions, because of the con-sin-quenches of your actions. Just to get this point across, to help you kind of see the big picture. I remember some years ago I was on Facebook, and there were some people who were like some of my Facebook friends, and some of them were atheists, and they were just talking about different things about the Bible that, they thought was stupid, and, they were going on and on talking about how, God was just this racist, sexist bigot who just hates all these different people and doesn't love anybody, and he's not this loving God, right? So they're just throwing all these different verses out there that they think makes their points, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, one of these guys, he was talking about the 10 commandments, and he was talking about how, basically saying that they're so limited, and how, if God really loves and cares about his people, why does it seem like he ignores so many important things in the Ten Commandments? And one of his examples was this. His main argument was this: well, there's rape, and rape is bad. And and if God really cared something about women, why didn't he say something in the Ten Commandments like thou shalt not rape, right? That was one of his main arguments. And when I read it, I'm sitting there thinking, well, he says love your neighbor as yourself. So if you love your neighbor, which is any and everybody, if you love everybody, you wouldn't rape them. You know what I mean? I mean, it kind of goes without saying. If you love somebody, you wouldn't do that to them anyway. That's So a lot of things that seems to be not mentioned in it kind of ties into the verses, the commandments that say, hey, love God, love your neighbor. Because when you love God, you love your neighbor, that cancels out a lot of things that you would do. There are mean things, terrible things, sins that you would decide you don't want to do because you love God and you don't want to sin against God, and because you love your neighbor, so you don't want to sin against your neighbor. So that's basically what Jesus is saying here. He's saying the two main laws is to love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Because on these two commandments hang all the commandments, all the laws, all the prophets. It can be summed up, in other words, it can be summed up in these two things. So I come here to say this again. One of the things that you can do to really keep you holding on to God's promises mentally and not moving forward, not trying to quench your own thirst and be a con man and sin your way through this to get what you want faster and how you want it and when you want it and where you want it and all this and that, is to remember Jesus said, love God, love my neighbor, and I don't want to sin against God, because if I love God, why would I sin against him? If I love my neighbor, why would I sin against them? Why would I do things to cause them hurt and harm? Why would I do things to cause God to be upset with me, but then turn around and say I love him? Why would I hurt people I love, innocent people, and just constantly do it to get what I want, but then turn around and say, oh, well, I love you, right? See where I'm going? So keep that in mind, something to hold on to, something to consider while you're waiting. Hey, I don't want to upset God. I don't want to hurt people. I'm supposed to love them, but if I love them, I shouldn't be, I need to stay in God's will, be obedient. Don't need to hurt people, drag people into this and get people in my mess, because it's going to be bad. Now go with me to John chapter 4, and let's look at verses 13 and 14. It says this, and we know what this is. This is from the story of the woman at the well. Jesus talking to the woman at the well. The woman, she was the woman that had all the husbands. She comes to the well, and Jesus is asking for water, and she's like, oh, I don't have nothing to get this water with, can't draw the water, blah, blah, blah. We know the story. But verses 13 and 14, it says this, Jesus answered and said unto her, whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. Talking about the water in the actual well, physical well. Verse 14, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water shall I give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. So Jesus is saying, listen, you can drink from this well right here all you want, but there's a water that I have. If you come to me, I can quench your thirst. He's saying, I'm just this everlasting well, this everlasting spring of water, of life. I can quench your thirst like none other. So we go out into the world wanting all these different things, having all these different desires, so needs and desires of our hearts. And God is concerned about what we're concerned about. He delights in giving us the desires of our hearts, but he doesn't want to be used by us. He wants a relationship with us. And through this relationship, the more we get to know him and love on him and trust in him and have faith in him, he delights more and more in not only providing for our needs, but even taking it a step further and giving us the desires of our hearts, as long as it's things that are not out of his will. So with that said, what I'm getting at here is this. It takes me to that verse in the Bible that talks about, submit yourself unto God and resist the devil and he shall flee. Well, when you submit to God, not only does it cause the devil to flee, but the more you submit to God, the more he will do for you, the more he will quench your thirst, because you've made yourself available for God to use and to bless, because you're saying, I'm submitting to you, I'm going to do things your way. So you make it easier for him to bless you, and it makes it easier for him to quench your thirst, to quench your desires. It's also very similar to the verse in the Bible that says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, then all these other things shall be added unto you. If you would seek him and submit yourself to him and to his will and say, okay, God, your timing, your will, your way, you just open up that door for him to constantly not only bless you, but to quench your thirst. He can quench your thirst more than anything that the world could ever do, but you'll never know if you continue to give in to the temptations of this world. So now go with me to the book of Songs, the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, however you want to say it. People say it different. But the Song of Solomon, chapter 8, looking at verses 6 and 7. Almost done with the sermon, almost there. Getting ready, getting close to wrapping it all up. One more place to go after this. Songs chapter 8, Song of Songs or Song of Solomon 8, verses 6 and 7. It says this, set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is cruel as the grave, the coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. Listen to this. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be contemned. I come here to this area to say this. God has a love for you that's parallel to none. Nothing can compare to the love of God, the love that he has for his children. Nothing can touch it. People can't give you the love that he can. The world can't give you the love that he can. His love is just unmatched by none. And so he wants to give it to you. Now, here's the thing. God loves all his people, but it's up to us to give him the opportunity to show us his love. See, love is more than just a saying. It's more than just saying I love you. Anybody can say it, but you know by the actions how much somebody really loves you. And God so much so wants to show his love. He wants to do it through action, not just say it to you. He wants to show you his love. So just like how a parent would provide for his child, he wants to provide for you. He wants to love on you. He wants to give you desires of your heart. He wants to be good to you. But you've got to, once again, be submissive to him and open up your heart to him and be willing to have faith in him to do what he says so that he can show you love by doing things for you, by blessing you, by providing for you, by speaking to you and putting you in all these positions to walk through these doors to give you opportunities. He wants you to be blessed. But again, it's not about you using him. It's a relationship. So the more you submit and the more you really seek him with your heart and the more you really strive for that relationship, he wants to show you just how much he loves you. Now, the flip side of that is that he wants you to have a love for him that cannot be quenched. In other words, no waters of the world, so to speak, Nothing else out there can quench the love that you have for him. He has an undying love for you. He has a love for you that can't be quenched. But in return, he wants you to have a love for him that can't be quenched. In other words, it's like he wants you to have a passionate love for him that's like a fire that can't be put out. No waters of the world can put it out. In other words, no matter what comes your way, you still love God. No matter what trials and tribulations come, you still love God. Though he slay me, come on, I'll still obey him. In other words, listen, it gets to a point when even if God doesn't give you a particular thing that you want so bad, you still say, okay, God, I still love you anyway. I'm still going to serve you anyway, because you're God and you know what's best for me. And I'm just believing that you have something better. When you get to the point where you love God, even if you don't get what you want, or if you don't get it right away, or if God is saying, no, I've got something better, whatever the case may be, when you get to that point, you're showing God, hey, God, the love that I have for you cannot be quenched. I'm going to show you that same love back with my actions by continuing to praise you and worship you and seek you, no matter what the circumstance. He wants that type of unquenchable love. So the point is, as you thirst after him, he will quench your thirst of other things, the things that you need and the desires of your heart, whatever it is that you want. He'll quench those thirsts as long as you thirst after him, because when you thirst after him, you thirst no more. And in return, though, he wants you to have a love for him that can't be quenched by the waters and things of the world. Get it? Thirst after him so that you thirst no more. And then you have a love in you. It builds up a love in you that cannot be quenched by outside sources. And so as that love builds up in you and continues to swell up in you like that spring, it makes it easier for you to then turn and say, okay, I love you so much, God, that I don't want to. Not to say that you'll never sin. We all sin. We all fall short of the glory of God. Just because you love God doesn't mean you're not going to mess up. But now you've decided in you, I'm going to strive the best that I can not to sin. In other words, when I do mess up, it's not just going to hurt God, it's going to hurt me. It's going to hurt my feelings and make me feel bad that I even did what I did. You see what I'm saying? You feel bad about it. You have a heart of repentance about it now. You don't just, act nonchalant about it and be like, oh, well, whatever. It actually stings now. Kind of like when we say, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. Now you feel what God feels. You know what I mean? You feel what he feels now. So that's what it comes down to. Thirst after him, you thirst no more, and then you get an unquenchable love for God. A love that can't be quenched. He quenches your thirst, and it's like a trade. You now have a love for him that can't be quenched. Kind of see how that kind of flows? And then you then in turn say, okay, I don't want to go out here and do all this stuff and step out of your will. I want to stay right in position. So again, continue to seek God, submit to him, seek him wholeheartedly, and just continue to stay put and say, God, I want to show you that I have this unquenchable love for you, the way you've been showing me your love for me, and the way I know you're going to show me soon enough, because I was obedient to you. So some things to uplift you, to keep you going, to keep the momentum going, so that you don't, just dry out and just, I'm so tired of waiting. This is to water you. Get it? Since I'm talking about waters and thirst and being quenched, this is to water you. This is to keep you motivated so you don't dry out and get stiff and sore. You just keep going. you keep pursuing what God has for you. So now, with all that said, and I've said what I've had to say to the Abrahams and the Davids out there who may be listening, I want to wrap this sermon up by going back to Genesis, because remember I told you to keep your spot there, and I'm going to read the last little bit I want to read, and then I'll end this sermon. But going back to Genesis 21, and let me say this, some of you may be thinking, some of you may be listening thinking, well, a lot of this stuff that you said about Abraham and David, yeah, it sounds familiar, it rings a bell and this and that, but it's not really for me. I'm not really the Abraham or the David. I feel more like the Hagar. I feel more like the Ishmael. I feel more like the one who got done wrong. In other words, maybe you're thinking, I've been around some people that are like Abraham and David, and it's like God really wanted to bless them, and they made a mistake with me, getting me involved in the mix of some stuff, and it seems like I kind of got the bitter end of the deal when they got the better end of the deal. You may be thinking, well, what about me? Going back to Genesis 21, we know what happened. Abraham had to kick Hagar out and Ishmael, her son. Look at what it says starting at verse 14, verses 14 through 20, and I'll be done with this sermon. It says this: And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water. There's that water I've been talking about, and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And I find it funny that Hagar, when she's kicked out, when her and her son are kicked out, she wanders around a wilderness called Beersheba. And the woman David messed around with was Bathsheba. What's up with these Shebas? Anyway, let's keep going. I just thought that was kind of like a funny little coincidence there. But anyway, let's keep going. Verse 15. And the water was spent in the bottle. So the water's all gone. It says, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. So she's upset. They're out of water. They're out of resources. They're wandering in a wilderness. They're wandering aimlessly. It seems like they have nowhere to go. And Hagar puts the child aside, and she goes and sits down in this wilderness, and she's just so upset. She's hurt. She's crying. She doesn't want to see the death of her child. Verse 17. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. So God begins to speak to Hagar. And the reason why he speaks to Hagar in this mess that she's in, if you notice, it was because the child cried out. Hagar had cried, she had wept, but the child, cause see, Ishmael still technically was blessed because he was the son of Abraham. Now, he wasn't the promised son from God, but God still said that he would still bless Ishmael. To an extent, it wouldn't be the extent of Isaac, the son Abraham had with Sarah, but still, he was going to bless this child anyway. So because of this child, and you got to think, in a way, you could almost say that the child is kind of why Hagar is in the situation she's in the first place. She had to be removed from the home because of this child that was going to be a distraction and a weight and was causing division in the home. Even though it seemed like, thanks to this child that she had, she ends up getting done wrong. It's through this child that she begins to hear from God. It's through this same child that really what seemed like it could have been a curse ends up being a bit of a blessing for her. It just seemed like it for a moment. It seemed like she was just stuck in the wilderness aimlessly with nowhere to go. But the very thing that seemed to cause her the most pain, other than being kicked out, the child, and then knowing that the child might die because she's out of water, out of food, out of resources, it's because of the cry of the child that God himself begins to speak to her. In other words, she ain't got to worry about, well, is Abraham going to come find me and say, thus saith the Lord? Is God going to come send someone else to come to me and say, well, God told me to tell you blah, blah, blah. God, straight from heaven, speaks out from heaven unto Hagar. So not only does he speak to her, but he goes on to say, hey, I'm going to help you out because of this child, because I've heard his voice. I know you've cried. I've heard your cries. But because of his cries that I've heard, I'm going to help you out. So he gives her direction. Not only does he speak to her, not only does he reveal that she's blessed because of the child, what seemed to be a curse is going to be what the devil meant for evil, God will make it good. All things work for the good of the, oh my goodness. So it turned out, oh my goodness, what seemed to be bad turned out for good for her. It ended up being her blessing and not her cursing. So not only all that, but she gives, or God gives her some direction. Verse 18 says, arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. So he goes on to tell Hagar, listen, I'm going to make a great nation out of your kid. In other words, watch. I'm going to bless you through him. This is going to be big. This is going to be awesome. Verse 19, and God opened her eyes, and she saw a well. Oh my goodness. And she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew. So at a moment where it seems like she's got nothing left, God speaks to her. God is saying, hey, you're basically saying your child is your blessing. You think this is a curse, but it's about to be a blessing for you. You're going to be blessed through him. He's going to be blessed. He's going to live. And now, behold, an oasis of water for you, wells of water, springs of living water for you. The water ran out, but he provided. He made a way out of no way. He made water appear right before her eyes, similar to what happened in the book of Acts with the Ethiopian eunuch out traveling. And he gets ministered to by the evangelist Philip, and then they look over, and there's water there for him to be baptized and for Philip to be refreshed. Behold, there's water in a place you thought not. Oh, goodness. I could go on and on with that for a while, but I'm going to wrap this up. So for the Hagars, let me just say, God's got you. He's your water too. He's your water too. God is still your water. You might not be an Abraham or a David. Go ahead and be a Hagar, because watch God turn what you think is bad into a blessing. Believe him for that. And watch how he turns your dry places into wells or springs or oases of living water. I thank you all for listening. I'm going to pray us out of here. Heavenly Father, I thank you for another time to minister another word. Lord, I just pray that those who need this message would tune in, that they would hear it, Lord, that they would be blessed, that they would seek you as the one to quench their desires, quench their thirst, and that they would let you instill in them your love, your undying, unquenchable love. Let us be filled with your love, the love of God, the love that can't be quenched. Because we'll love you more, God. We'll want to refrain from sin and not stepping out of your will. But also it will cause us to love our neighbors more as well, because, well, To love our neighbor is to love you. Lord, I just give you all the praise and the glory and honor. Everybody be blessed. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.